Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's online communist forum, sponsored by the Communist Party of Great Britain and Labour Party Marxists. This week, Jack Conrad will be looking at events in the Oval Office and the response from Europe, and also providing an update on communist fusion. The event is live streamed, although the discussion afterwards is not. So I will hand over to Jack. Thank you very much, Jack.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, I'm going to begin, where else could you begin? In the Oval Office, obviously in the White House. I didn't actually watch it on TV. The BBC very helpfully broadcast it end to end on their news. And wow. It sort of wasn't unexpected to me, but nonetheless, you have to comment on it, don't you? The word that came to my mind was the theatre of cruelty, and I had to look it up, but it doesn't particularly matter about the particular school of theatre, but they're the words that came into my head. Anyway, I looked up the theatre of cruelty, and apparently it was invented by a French guy called Anatin Artand. And this was in the early years of the 20th century. He was a surrealist that got himself kicked out of the surrealists. And what's interesting about his theatre is that cruelty was meant to expose how should I put it, unacceptable relations between people. This was a theatre that was meant to enable you to see the underbelly of human relationships. And it was taken up by a number of other theatre directors. So the one that comes to my mind, that was listed at least when it came to Wikipedia, was Peter Brook. I can't say I know any of his productions. I can see that, but nonetheless, the idea of using shock, the idea of going off script, if you see the point, of getting the audience to see things as they really are, as opposed to what they pretend to be. This was something I think that was acted out in the White House and in the Oval Office in front of TV cameras. Now, my version of it is, and I'm sure I'm right, is that this was an ambush. And whatever Zelensky said or did or wore, he was going to be ripped to pieces by Trump and J.D. Vance. And maybe part of the setup was that in terms of preparation for this meeting, the White House purportedly put out a request, an instruction, I don't know what, that it would be advisable, something along those lines, that the president dressed appropriately, i.e. in a suit. And that would make sense because listening to it on the BBC, they helpfully provided a heckle. As the president of Ukraine came into the room, a particular journalist shouted out, he's dressed in his suit, or words to that effect. And Trump also came out with something along the lines, he's dressed up smart today. We know now, at least I know now, even if I saw it on TV, I wouldn't have known the guy, but we know now who the journalist was that was responsible for this heckle. It's one journalist called Brian Glenn. I hadn't heard of him either, but if I said to you that he's the current boyfriend of Marjorie Green Taylor, you'd be going, wow, yeah, that story now makes sense to me. We know the relationship between Marjorie Green Taylor and Trump. We know, her politics. And so, okay, we don't know whether this was closely choreographed, but it wouldn't surprise me if this journalist had been either given a copy of the advised dress code or told about this is what the White House had been saying to Zelensky. Either way, if he'd come in a suit, he would still be subject to the humiliation that he was. What about Zelensky? Did he handle it right? I don't think he could have handled it any differently. I mean, he could have on one level, but whatever he did, he was going to get done. And I think, again, I don't know. I've tried to read a decent account of the man. You cannot read one, at least not that I've discovered. Apparently, there are dreadful biographies of him. The reviews I've read said, don't bother reading them. And I sort of follow that advice. We all know the backstory of Zelensky, on the other hand. A good actor, a good comedian, a successful actor, a successful comedian, a successful director as well. So he knows how to act. And as we all know, the paradox is that his famous part in his TV series, which he was one of the producers of, had the character of a Ukrainian teacher who accidentally ends up as president. And lo and behold, there you are, the character becomes the man, becomes the president. What, of course, the TV show didn't predict is that he would go from being the anti-corruption president, and I'm saying that in inverted commas, go from the anti-corruption president to the wartime leader and hero of the West. So he was a hero of the West, yes, in terms of this election campaign. He was marketed very successfully. He got, 73% of the recorded vote. And then we had the special military operation beginning something like 3 years ago. And what Zelensky, and this is what I'm trying to get into his head, what Zelensky would have been used to directly after that is being feted. Feted in terms of when he goes on a foreign visit, he would turn up in Washington, he'll be taken to joint session of the Congress, he'll be taken to 10 Downing Street, he'll be taken to the Elysee Palace, he would be taken and greeted as a hero everywhere he went. And indeed, until relatively recently, you could make the same argument internally. And certainly, his party, Servant of the People, a completely manufactured party, has got a clear majority in the Rada. Zelensky has got no problem getting stuff through the Ukrainian parliament. But of course, what we have in Ukraine today, since the special military operation began, is martial law. And that's how Ukraine is run. So how well, or if at all, Zelensky was with his crucial meeting, how well he was prepared for his crucial meeting with J.D. Vance and Trump, I don't know. But I would have thought he'd thought about it. I would have thought he'd been rehearsed. I would have thought he would have been advised, practiced. How do you respond? He would also be aware of the two previous notable visits. And I'm not thinking about Netanyahu, who was never going to be given a rough ride in the Oval Office. I'm thinking about Macron, and I'm thinking about Starmer. And what they seem to have been advised is, well, sort of be humble, but shows some backbone. That seemed to be the formula. So we had Macron correcting Trump. We had Keir Starmer coming out of the meeting, at least with the idea that the United Kingdom might escape tariffs that might be imposed on European goods. In other words, Macron had a good meeting with Trump, and so did Starmer. Either way, clearly Zelensky went in. I don't think he was expecting to be treated as the hero by Trump, but he was going in prepared to disagree, just as Macron had done, perhaps as Starmer had done. Either way, he was on a loser, and we saw what Trump did to him. We saw what J.D. Vance did to him. All his stuff about, well, we've been invaded, all the stuff about wanting a security backup. He was basically slapped down. You've got no cards in your hands. Don't come to us telling us what to do. We're interested in peace, and you've cocked it up. And that was the basic brutal message. As I said, I think it was a setup. I think it was an ambush. Okay, that didn't include the banquet afterwards. The cooks hadn't been told, don't bother with a banquet. They prepared the banquet. It was there ready for them to go to. And apparently the staffers, the young staffers, had a right nosh up after Zelensky was shown the door, and he was shown the door. So in terms of what Zelensky's future is, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. I don't think he knows. I don't think Trump knows. It's up in the air. Either way, we should be aware of the fact that Zelensky isn't a free operator. That if we look at Ukraine itself, imagine for a moment that he'd behave like King Abdullah, the king of Jordan, when he went to the Oval Office and listened while Trump and Vance talked about the future of Gaza and expelling people into Jordan and turning Gaza into the Riviera, a new Riviera on the Mediterranean. He basically had to bite his lip. He sort of sealed his mouth. Now that will cost King Abdullah something on the Arab street, on the streets of Amman. A big percentage of the population in Jordan are Palestinian. A big percentage of the population in Jordan closely, passionately identify with the Palestinians, but he had to keep his mouth shut. Okay, so imagine if Trump's talking about peace, there's 20% of Ukrainian territory, and I get my 500 billions worth of your rare metals to pay for all this equipment that we've been sending you generously over the years. What would have happened to Zelensky's political standing, which is already low in Ukraine? It's not 4%, I think, that Trump talked about elsewhere. And we're not talking about, do you back the president? The more interesting ones to look at is the opinion polls in Ukraine. Who would you vote for if there were new presidential elections? And what you get is something like 20% of Ukrainians who are interviewed say, I would vote for Zelensky. He's way behind the ambassador, the former head of the military, who's on about 42%. And indeed, Zelensky isn't that far behind the founder of the Azov brigade. And that's relevant because if he'd kept his mouth shut when Trump had talked about dividing the country, selling off its resources, what do we expect the Azov brigade to do? Well, I've already, again, this is pure speculation. I'm not claiming anything else, but I would expect something like a march by the Azov forces onto the capital, and then being greeted as they marched, and as they marched in to the capital, I would expect them to be widely greeted as saviors of Ukraine's honor. And perhaps the most militant people in the Azov movement are foreign fighters. They ought to be considered as well. Imagine what the morale is at the moment, not in terms of vox pops of the Ukrainian population, which I don't think will give you a particularly useful result at the moment, but imagine what frontline soldiers are thinking at the moment. A big majority, I would guess, would have their morale at rock bottom. The Azov brigade, on the other hand, I think would be, this is, as I say, speculation, but I think they will be furious. I think they will be talking about Zelensky selling us out. He's prepared to sell out Ukrainian territory to people that we've been fighting for 3 years. He's needlessly sacrificed, right? 40,000, 50,000, whatever the true figure of Ukrainian deaths have been. It's also possible under these circumstances, without a presidential election, that Zelensky will fall on his own sword, or at least be encouraged by the Ukrainian elite to fall on his sword, so that Trump can have a different president, and they can have a different Ukrainian president sitting around the table, if that ever happens, with Putin. So we don't know. But what I would say about the, as I said, the theatre of cruelty is that the theatre of cruelty reveals the true relationship. And we need to understand that while there's been a change in US policy, the power relationship has always been the same. And so although Zelensky is being greeted as a hero, we shouldn't for one moment imagine that he's been in command. That it's him that's wagging, the US dog. He is and has always been a US puppet. And if we look at the United States, and if we wanted to look at what's been going on in Ukraine, I'm not saying it's the only place to start, but at least I would start in 2014. And what we had is the overthrow of a democratically elected president. That's what happened. We had a leading role played by the far right. I would call them fascist forces, people like the right sector. And then we have Zelensky coming in as the anti-corruption candidate in these circumstances, and then acting as the chosen hero, the lion of Kiev, as he was dubbed. As to dress, I won't be the first, but I think it is, worthwhile repeating, journalistic comment from the sort of liberal press on this particular question. I myself thought, when I heard this, haven't I just seen pictures, at least, stills of a certain Elon Musk in the Oval Office? Haven't I just seen pictures of Elon Musk joining the cabinet meeting? He's not a member of the cabinet, but there he was. And what's he dressed in? A baseball cap, jeans, a t-shirt. Was he, did J.D. Vance tear a strip off him and say, inappropriate, Elon, get out of here, you're showing disrespect for the president and the American people? No, they fawned on him. And again, this is the last example I'll give, but in my mind, and the irony is that there behind Trump, you've got a bust of an Englishman, okay, half American, had an American mum, a certain Winston Churchill, hero of Trump and the right in America. And look at pictures of him visiting Washington during World War II. How does he present himself? He doesn't don, the uniform of a five-star general. He doesn't go there in a business suit. He wears what is called a siren suit. For you and me, a boiler suit. You talk about casual dress. That's about the most casual dress you can imagine. This is a workman's, wear. Yes, he's got his characteristic cigar, so he doesn't look like a proletarian. Nonetheless, does anyone say that Churchill showed Roosevelt and the American people disrespect for turning up in a siren suit? No, he's clearly marketing himself as a wartime leader in exactly the same way as Zelensky was advised to do, or chose to do, I would have guessed, advised to do consistently wherever he's appeared, in public, both in Ukraine, on the front line, in parliaments, in congresses, meeting with prime ministers, meeting with royalty. He always presents himself as a wartime leader. Now it's become unacceptable. So he was going to lose. He was always going to lose because Trump wants his deal. He both wants his 500 billion, but he also wants to do a deal with Putin. Now, whether Zelensky resigns, whether Zelensky eats humble pie and is then overthrown in an Azov coup, it doesn't make any difference to the political and strategic and economic weakness of Ukraine. That's not going to change. The question then comes, is Europe serious about substituting for the United States? Well, I adopt what I would call a skeptical attitude. If we look at the figures, it's true that Europe as a whole has supplied more in terms of equipment and arms to Ukraine than the United States by a margin, a narrow margin. But nonetheless, throughout the 3 years, Europe has supplied more. The question is, once you start digging down into that equipment, you see it isn't quite as straightforward as that. Because amongst the equipment, which would certainly be high value, way up there in the millions and millions of dollars worth of equipment, for example, would be F-16 fighter aircraft. I don't know what they cost. They're not as expensive as the latest generation of US fighters, i.e. the F-35. They're fourth generation as opposed to fifth generation, but Europe has been supplying them. And anyone who knows anything about, and I've educated myself over this period, anyone who knows anything about fighter aircraft will know that they take an awful lot of maintenance. So for every hour that they fly, and they're not a war winner in Ukraine, but for every hour they're in the air, they take something like 15 hours of maintenance. And the maintenance isn't just about refueling them and tightening a bolt here and a nut there. It's also about replacement parts. And where do the replacement parts come from? Primarily the United States. So Europe is supplying, at least in some measure, US equipment to Ukraine, which relies on constant supplies of spare parts if they're going to be kept in the air. Again, just to illustrate it, not because they're a war winner, but because they, served a symbolic purpose, and that is these British, French missiles. In France, they're called Scalp. In Britain, they're called Storm Shadows. Remember the big fuss that there was about Keir Starmer supplying these missiles? The point about these missiles is that, of course, that Putin said, if you use these missiles, we will regard this as an attack by NATO. And you go, as the BBC did, as the propaganda voice of Ukraine and NATO. What's it got to do with NATO? Well, anyone who knows anything about these missiles will know that they are pinpoint accuracy. And so they're used not to bombard the other side, they're used to take out command posts. They're used in order to strike at particularly important either strategic or tactical targets. So take out a bridge, take out a defended, in terms of concrete, command post. But the point would be, in order to give you pinpoint accuracy, which is what they have, you rely not just on GPS, you rely on military GPS. Well, both systems are American systems. And if you just launch these missiles on the basis of a pre-programmed view of the terrain, you lose the accuracy. Either way, the point I'm making is, if you look at what enables Ukraine to put up the fight that it's done, it's not just equipment that's come from Europe, it's US technology. And if you look at how Ukrainian commanders communicate with their front line, and Trump has made that point, it's because of Elon Musk and Starlink. So when a commander picks up the phone, talks, what's going on the front line? This is because of Starlink. What can be turned on can be turned off. GPS, military level GPS, can be turned off. Starlink can be turned off. The supply of spare parts that keep your F-16s running, and not only your F-16s, but your Abraham tanks, your howitzers, your personnel carriers, your howitzers. All of this American equipment will need replacement parts. Trump can simply turn it off. And the idea that Europe can go ahead and substitute without the agreement of the United States, and I'm emphasizing that, I don't think is credible. So they could go ahead and back Ukraine, spend taxpayers' money, European taxpayers' money, perhaps with the permission of Trump. But I don't believe myself at the moment that they are capable of doing it or would want to do it against the wishes of Trump. So you might end up in a situation, a big might, that Russia agrees some sort of ceasefire. That's what the Kellogg plan that Trump has been committed to way back in the early months of the presidential campaign before he won his supermajority. So we know that that's on the table. We don't know whether Putin will accept it. Either way, one of the suggestions is that Europe supplies frontline soldiers to be peace keepers. Now, is that going to be acceptable to Putin? I haven't got a clue, but I can sort of see why Lavrov, the foreign minister, says that is not on. This will be NATO troops, remember, on the borders of New Russia. Maybe they go, okay, we get 20% of the land. You extend, in effect, NATO up to these new borders, and you replace Ukrainian frontline troops with a load of French, British, German, Polish, Scandinavian troops. Who knows? But I would also just say this, that precisely, it's not only Zelensky who can have shit happen to him, like the election of Donald Trump and a new politics, which makes sense to me. I mean, you could say that is Trump just wanting to win the Nobel Peace Prize? Maybe, but that's not what it's about, surely. No, it's surely about trying. I'm very skeptical about the success of it, but trying to prise Russia away from its alliance with China. That makes sense to me. That sort of fits the pieces together. So hence the importance of Trump raising the question of the G7, i.e. the revival of the G8. In other words, Russia, you can join as a junior member, but you can join the imperialist club. Maybe. If you're Putin, if you're the FSB, would you bank on Trump lasting not 4 years? That's reasonably safe. Is he going to get a third term? Maybe, maybe. J.D. Vance, will he have a sort of a shoe-in as the replacement? No one knows. So we don't know yet, and Moscow won't know. So will you trust America not to choose a new president with a new old foreign policy? We haven't heard anything from the Democrats that tell us that that's going to happen. So there's also the possibility, remember, under these conditions, that they don't sign a deal and Trump goes and says, okay, under these circumstances, we're going to go all out in this war. What then happens in Moscow? What happens to Putin? Isn't he under political pressure as well to deliver a deal? There you are, you dumbass, Vladimir. You had a deal within sight. We'd get 20% of Ukrainian land. There's more of these rare metals in our bit of Ukraine than there is in the other bit of Ukraine, if that's what it's all about. I don't think so. But here we are. We had this deal. We'd have had sanctions off, and you blew it. And Trump, you can imagine him already saying, well, this old Vladimir isn't like the young Vladimir I met when in my first presidency. That one was a clever guy. That one knew a good deal when he saw one. The old Vladimir doesn't see a good deal when he sees it. We don't know. All we do know is that we've had the curtain parted. We've had the lid lifted in terms of what the real power relationships are in the capitalist world. And if you diss the United States, you can be disposed of. That's the reality of it. And most politicians know that. And therefore, most politicians sing the American tune, the special relationship. What a wonderful president we've got. But Zelensky was in an impossible position. That's my argument. So what did Trump say? Make a deal or we are out. And what I take by that is we turn off the tap. And you've then had Zelensky going around about how vital the United States is. And I've made the argument that that is precisely accurate. Okay, just to bring that story to an end, I think it's worthwhile looking at the comments of a certain Dominique de Villepin. I don't know if anyone remembers him. You have to be of a certain age to remember him. He was I think he was the French foreign minister at the time of the Iraq war. And basically, he's the one that came out and said, this war is illegal. We're not going to go with it. And it's what forced Britain and the United States to go unilaterally. They could not get the blessing of the Security Council because, of course, France has a veto on the Security Council. And it was Dominique that made that speech. And anyway, he's no longer foreign minister, but in a couple of years, he could easily be a candidate to replace Macron. Now, we know that Macron has done his 2 terms. Just like in the United States, there's a 2-term limit. He can go, I don't know what the term, I think it's a 5-year term in France. He can go 5 years after that. He's young enough to do that. Either way, he cannot stand in 2027. We know who the candidate, we suspect who the candidate of the right will be. It will be Marine Le Pen. We'd expect a candidate of the left, the Popular Front, Mélenchon. But who's the candidate, the chosen heir of Macron? I don't know of one. On the other hand, Dominique de Villepin could be, and that's what he's trying to put himself forward as. He's going to be the champion of liberal democracy. And he's saying that nowadays we don't just have illiberal regimes in Beijing and Moscow. We have an illiberal regime in Washington, D.C. And Europe needs to get its act together, and we need to use this crisis in US-European relations to move our project forward. And he's talking about European defense, European arms industry, European army, and one would presume some sort of push towards European unification. I'm not holding my breath, certainly not with the EU. The EU is designed specifically not to do anything. Any country in the EU can exercise a veto, and we know who the candidates for veto will be: Slovenia, but crucially, most outstandingly, Hungary at the moment. But if you didn't have Hungary, quite frankly, you could buy yourself an equivalent. Malta, Cyprus, they're easy to find. So who knows? Who knows what will happen? I've heard the argument, and I'm not convinced by it. On the other hand, I wouldn't want to discount it, that Trump actually even has a bigger strategic plan. I know that people say that he lacks intelligence. I'm not convinced on that. He'll certainly have thinkers around him that are capable of strategic thinking. Yes, he's mercurial. He can change. He can sack people left, right, and center. On the other hand, he is thinking, how do I make America great again? And how do I make it greater? Hence his stuff about the Panama Canal, his stuff about Greenland, which I wouldn't write off, even his stuff about making Canada the 51st state. If you can unite Scotland with England, you can unite the United States with Canada. Don't dismiss it. Don't say that this is impossible. It will take longer than 4 years, true. Nonetheless, okay, so what Trump has in mind is precisely really skewering Putin and Russia. And what he's after is actually NATO frontline troops. This is really part of his plan, paid for by Europe, on the borders of Russia, not just in a little bit of the Baltics and Finland up there, but right along to the heart of Russia. Let's have NATO troops there and arm the new Ukraine as a bigger version of Israel. So we'll have NATO troops. You won't have NATO membership, but in effect, you won't have a neutral Ukraine. You'll have a NATO dependent Ukraine. Maybe that's the bigger Trump plan. And under those conditions, when the FSB look at the deal, if it's a huge if, that Putin signs up to, they say you've signed up to a disaster, and they get rid of him, and Russia falls to pieces, and who the hell knows what happens after that. We don't know, but there could be the possibility that Trump is thinking even bigger, as I said, than that. So radically subordinate Europe, yeah, I think that's on the cards. Get it to pay for an extension of American foreign policy, that's on the cards. And maybe then even pull a fast one on Putin while praising him at the same time. Meanwhile, of course, you've got the European economy economically stagnant, Germany declining, Britain mired, maybe Spain is growing the best, but you're not saying much, are you? But the voters being presented with a choice of guns or butter. And what's remarkable at the moment is the consensus that they've constructed with politicians, at least. We haven't got voters yet, but going for the guns. So I found it interesting that the Liberal Democrats here in Britain are actually saying we need more. We need more arms. We need Keir Starmer going fast. Look at Annalisa Dobbs when she resigned. She said it's really, and I can understand it from her point of view. What's the point of being foreign aid minister when you've got no foreign aid to dish out? I mean, a good slice of her budget is already spent in Britain on asylum seekers. So she's basically minister of nothing. Okay, so she resigns in protest. I understand why, but she says, I accept the need to spend more. I accept Keir Starmer's cuts, but it shouldn't be here. So what are you going to cut? Pensioners? What are you going to cut? Unemployment benefit? The NHS? Education? What's going to give? So I mean, all you can say at the moment, there's no Geldorf, there's no Band-Aid movement. So chuck foreign aid overboard. But there's going to be more, isn't there? That's not going to be enough for 2.5%, 3% more. So this is the future in Europe. Will the electorate, rebel to the right? Will they rebel to the left? We don't know. But the left needs to be in a position where it isn't just going for pacifism. It isn't just saying, that what we want is capitalism, nice and cuddly. Capitalism has an innate tendency towards war. And that's where we're at the moment. And we're getting closer to war, in my view, than we are going away from it, in spite of Trump's rhetoric. Okay, so it's now 41, and I'm going to go straight on to communist fusion. We had a meeting last week. There's been reports of it. I haven't read other comrades' reports of it. What was useful is that I think it was the day before our meeting, which was on Sunday, last Sunday at 10 o'clock, Comrade Ed Potts and Ed and Nick presented us with two documents, which were a series of suggestions and criticisms of our draft program. We'd agreed at the previous meeting a fortnight before that we would make the draft program at the center of discussion. So although I didn't have any time to consult with Mike McNair, who's the other comrade representing the CPGB in these talks, or other comrades on the PCC, let alone the membership of the CPGB, I at least had an idea of what the comrades' objections were. And some comrades have expressed their surprise at these objections, and I sort of share that on some level, because I know I've been through this before, but it's worthwhile repeating. The first meeting I attended, I went in with a pretty heavy heart because I was we're going to have an education program, and we're going to deal with the MUG, the Marxist Unity Group in the United States, their induction program. And I was going, well, yeah, okay, worthy, but yeah. And then I heard the comrades from TAS, and I heard the comrades from Prometheus say, we're not interested in an education program, worthy as it is. What we're interested in is fusion. And I went, good God, this is really great. And so hence my, spring in the tail over these meetings. But precisely, looking at it from the point of view of Nick and Comrade Ed, here you are in terms of who you want to fuse with. They've got a draft program. They've got a stress on democracy. Their program emphasizes, and always had, accept as opposed to agree. They've always criticized other sections of the left for having a confessional approach to politics, that you're almost meant to have something at the equivalent of the Church of England or the Church of Rome and its catechism, that to be a member of the Church of England, as I understand it, I was never confirmed. I went to a Church of England school. Don't they have something like 39 articles or something like that that you sign up for, that you believe in the Trinity, the resurrection, and virgin birth? I don't know. Either way, you're meant to sign up to it. We don't take that approach. But what we do have is a draft program that's definitely designed for the now, but is also designed for the future. And our model is the classic programs of social democracy, Germany, France, Russia. Our model is the Bolsheviks, 1919. And this is about how do we go from today's conditions to the conquest of political power. That's what our program is about. So it's about not only what comrades are being asked to accept as the basis of joint activity today, but also, is this strategy realistic in terms of taking us from today's capitalism to the point where the working class can unite itself and come to power? And that's the point of our program. That's the point of the program of Marxism. So the classic programs of Marxism don't begin with belief. They begin with accept, but they are strategic documents, and they're not dictated by what we're going to do is add this group on. I know you can make an argument about the Gotha program, but nonetheless, the point is still there that this isn't dictated by organizational ups or organizational downs. In other words, if we look at Russia, and it's not, I'm just using it as an example, and not because I'm obsessed with Russia, but if we look at the RSDLP, the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, it adopted at its proper founding Congress, the Second Congress, 1903, it adopted the program of the Iskra Group with a couple of amendments with one abstention. And it kept that program. Both wings of the party adhered to that program all the way through until the Bolsheviks, Russian Communist Party, rewrote the program in 1919. And that's the sort of approach we take. On the other hand, the comrades put forward a 17-point program, that's what they called it, really for after the revolution. This is when you have a Communist Party government, and they talk about Soviets, or they allude to things like Soviets, but also they come out with something we're meant to agree with that says, and when you come to program, you do talk about dotting the I's and crossing the T's. You have to be exact in terms of language that you use. They begin with the idea communism is democratic. I know what they mean, but this is what they say. They also end that particular formulation, which is formulation number 14 of their 17 points, with the statement, we oppose all dictatorships. Well, again, I know what they mean, except anybody could quote you Charlie Marx, and the quote I used in my article was the first time I think he used the term the dictatorship of the proletariat. So I quoted him saying, down with the bourgeoisie, dictatorship of the proletariat. I then quoted Engels from later in his life, explaining that the working class, when it takes power, will introduce full democracy, maximum democracy. But as the state is withering away, democracy will wither away. Now, I can go, will there be votes under communism? Will there be disputes about building a dam or having a forest? I'm sure there will be. But we're talking about the state. We're talking about armed bodies of men to enforce people, to enforce those decisions. Either way, classical Marxism says that democracy itself, a form of the state, will wither away. So you have a semi-state that withers away. And I finished it with good old Vladimir Ilyich in State and Revolution. They would have been kept out of this new party because they would have to agree to it. Well, okay, they're dead, but I would be kept out because hand on heart, I couldn't say that I agree to that formulation. And the other problem, I think, with the comrades' formulation is, as they say, that this would be acceptable. I can't remember the exact list, but the Socialist Workers' Party, the Alan Woods rebrand, socialist alternative, I don't know who else. And the problem is, okay, it would be acceptable, but what you lose is political democracy. What you put yourself into is another version of economism that talks about the working class fundamentally in relationship to the means of production, seizing the means of production. This is what's important. Yeah, communism is democratic, but do you fight for it now? Do you fight for extreme democracy now? If you don't fight for extreme democracy, either you end up tailing the liberal bourgeoisie or the petty bourgeoisie, or you actually say that this stuff isn't important and only, it's only socialism and the future that matters. So what do you say about Scotland and Wales? What do you say about the women's question now? What do you say about, I don't know, homosexuality now? What do you say about the House of Lords? What do you say about the monarchy now? How do you actually train the working class to become a future ruling class? And this brings me straight to the question of what we call the middle classes. In Britain, according to government statistics, there are something like 5.5 million small to medium enterprises. That's people employing from 0 to 49 people. As a rough number of, heads of households, if you can use that term, that is the petty bourgeoisie, that's the middle classes in some sort of sense. But also we need to think, and as we've argued, that we don't just think in terms of the breakthrough happening in Britain. Yes, that's the territory we're fighting on at the moment, but we also think about the breakthrough happening on a European scale. So what about the French peasantry? What about the German peasantry? What about the artisans in Europe? Certainly when it comes to Western Europe, who've been artificially maintained by the state as a counter-revolutionary bulwark. What do we say about them? And the comrades were arguing, well, what we do because they employ somebody, from 0 people to 49 people, we've got to look after the 0 to 49, and therefore we nationalize them. So that means, my next door restaurant, that means the barber shop over the road, that means the newspaper shop who employs a couple of guys. That means my local plumber who employs a number of Poles, etc., 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 etc. What happens, in terms of our strategy, if you're telling people that when we come to power, we're going to take your businesses away from you? I don't think they're going to become allies of ours. I think they'll become opponents of ours. And they become, in that sense, then a self-fulfilling prophecy. Our approach, on the other hand, with very strict limits, is to say we will defend these people against big capital, against the banks, against the state. We want to win these people. So, for example, when it comes to the inheritance tax issue, we're not just going to go along with the government. On the other hand, we're not going to say to hell with small farms. Let's put them into big farms. Let's have, universal agro-industry. No, we actually want to win these people. Now that goes hand in hand with trade union rights. That goes hand in hand with limits on hours. That goes hand in hand with the pay question. So these are the limits, and that would apply both before the revolution and after. So this is not unqualified. This isn't us, being the party of the middle classes, but it is us being the party of the proletariat that is saying you have got nothing to fear from us. Because to the extent that we socialize things, one, it's going on anyway under capitalism, but we will actually emphasize the voluntary nature of socialization. Cooperatives, we would talk about state loans. We would talk about facilitating these people joining, the working class, but in a positive way, as opposed to being forced into the working class. And so therefore, although I very much hope that the comrades are right when they think that coming to power will be very easy, and the transition where you get rid of wage labor and you move towards a position where people consume on the basis of need. They think it's so short to be almost irrelevant. Actually, one thing I would agree in terms of, with this week's weekly workers letters is one with Andrew Northall. Now, I don't go with him that what we want is a minority regime because we have no hope of becoming a majority. I reject that idea. I think the comrade is mistaken. I understand why he's saying it, but we think that we can become a majority. But where he's right is that we've not only got property to deal with, we've got human beings, and human beings will take time in terms of a transition from a capitalist mentality of where we talk about looking after, number one, our family, our friends, and sod the rest. That sort of, we've got to move towards a situation where people consume responsibly, of where people labor to their full because they actually get joy from it. That is not going to be instant. There will be a transition. There'll also be class struggle internationally, but also domestically. So although I hope that the TAS comrades are right, and what we call socialism, dictatorship of the proletariat, transition period, whatever name you want to choose, lower phase of communism, whatever you call it, of course we hope it will be as short as possible. Lenin famously, when he saw a banner on a May Day, I think this is a true story, although it might be an apocryphal one, the comrades were carrying a big banner saying, "Long live socialism." And Lenin is meant to have remarked, "No, short live socialism. We want it to be short. We want communism, not socialism." And with that happy thought, Andy, I'm going to finish. So short live communism, short live socialism, long live communism. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jack. That's great. Okay, we'll now open up the discussion for contributions from the floor. Just to let attendees know, if you wish to make a contribution or ask a question, you can either do so via the chat or else you can use the raise hand function, which is accessed via the reactions menu item on your screen. You'll then be made into a panelist and we'll be able to hear you. Without further ado, I will open it up. I have already Paul Flewers wishing to make a contribution. Thank you very much, Paul.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, yeah.
You.
Yeah. Just one thing on Trump's bullying of Zelensky. I think this goes along with Trump's character of denigrating people he sees as losers, whether it's Zelensky as an individual, Ukraine as a country, or Gaza, where he just thinks that the Gaza can't with a bunch of losers. Let's redevelop the place as a golf course. So it's a contemptuous sort of bullying attitude that's typical of his character. But insofar as Ukraine goes, him and his team have got, as Jack was saying, a more realistic appraisal of the chances of defeating Russia, or rather not defeating Russia, than the entire political class and mainstream media in Britain, and a devil of a lot of it elsewhere. And he does want to wind up this war. Now, this actually raises an interesting question, because about a couple of months ago, I raised the question of choices in American foreign policy. And I think it was, I don't know if it was Jack or whether it was Mike said that, accused me of Kautskyism, but because I said that it wasn't necessarily inherent in American foreign policy to end up supporting Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia to provoke a political crisis, break up of the Russian state, and so forth. Now, Jack seems to be saying today that, yeah, there are choices for facing American foreign policy. But in fact, we're seeing this with Trump. It seems to me that within the general strategy of confronting China, Trump is putting forward quite a sizable tactical change of getting Russia on side, or at least neutral. So either I was right and or counts, I don't know, in my Kautskyist deviation or whatever, or Jack's changed his view, or Mike's changed the view of the Communist Party towards that. Because I've always thought there are choices within general strategic lines. There are choices facing capitalist countries, especially the powerful imperialist ones. Now, what I see Trump's doing here is saying who's the boss in NATO. I don't think he wants to break up NATO. It's too useful for dominating the European powers, telling them British, German, French, so forth, bourgeoisie, so who's in charge of this, and the idea of Europe going it alone. Now, I don't think we discussed that very far at the moment. Jackson threw in a few sort of pointers there. Is it really realistic to see Europe going alone? We see it at the moment. Trump is being contradicted by Starmer. Trump and his team are saying, Ukraine is not going to be in NATO. We want a peace deal with Russia. And Starmer's saying, no, we've got this 1,000-year agreement. No, it's a 100-year agreement, isn't it, with Ukraine.